I don't know how, nor do I know why, but one thing is for sure. Whatever was on that flash drive, it genuinely made me question the motives of certain people, and the reason why they do the things that they do. Now, obviously, I've already lost my faith in humanity long back, but I think that after seeing the contents that I've seen, and the lack of responses that I had gotten from the creator of the video, my feeling of mankind has pretty much cemented itself shut. I do apologize if this may seem a bit confusing for some of you out there, but so I guess the best thing for me to do is just to shut up and tell my story. This all started up at around 5 or 6 weeks back. I was in my college dorm having to work my ass off on a couple of major projects that had to be done for my psychology class. If you're wondering what that specific project is, it was about the effects of cinematography on the human mind, what it does, how it triggers our brain waves, and the lasting impression it has on the person after watching said film or clip. Yeah, my professor was an interesting kind of woman when it came to how she taught her lessons to everyone. Even today, I can't tell you how thankful I am of that woman for helping me learn everything so well, and ultimately being the one that wound up getting me the job that I have now. The project itself was also to be brought up in the form of a visual explanation as well as a 5-page Word document as well, all of which had to be placed on a flash drive and turned in by the end of the month. Seems simple, right? Well, to an extent, yes, but there was one problem at the time. All of the flash drives that I had already been filled to the brim with other projects and assignments that were due for other classes. Not only that, but each flash drive really didn't have a whole lot of extra space left for other projects, and my friends wouldn't lend me any of their spares that they had, as they had pretty much the same problem that I did, so, as you would have thought, I was pretty much shit out of luck. Now, I could have went out and bought one at Walmart or Best Buy, however the stores were nearly a couple of miles away from the campus I lived on, and I couldn't really waste any of the gas that I needed to get to and from to my part-time job either. I mean, gas prices around that time were rather high, and of course, I couldn't waste any of it. Like I said, I was kind of fucked. Despite the rather unfortunate predicament I was in, I wasn't really in the mood to just give up on something that I really needed to do, so my next bet that I had was to make a couple of flyers to see if anybody would sell me any flash drives. Well, to make a long story short, it actually worked. One of my dorm mates, named Matt by the way, offered to sell me a few of his flash drives that he hadn't been using for some time for about a cool $50. I of course agreed to it and gave him the cash. My reward? 10 or 15 1TB flash drives, all various models and shapes, in a small plastic box, all for me to use. I thanked him for the drives, and he simply waved at me and thanked me for taking them off of his hands. Now, I could have easily just used the drives for the project itself and just ignored the rest of them, as I really had no use for them at the time. However, given the fact that I needed to check them and erase any spare files, projects, etc. on them, well, that, and the fact that I also hit a rather large bump in my project, and it was now suffering with a severe case of writer's block, so if anything, the break itself would probably hopefully get my creative juices flowing. Who knows? I think I went through about 5 or 6 of those flash drives, spending nearly 3.5 hours clearing them all off. I even had to get a couple of friends of mine to clear out one of the files that had been encrypted, for some odd reason. Finally, when I got to around the 6th flash drive, I found that a grand majority of the files themselves had been encrypted. And I know, I could have just had my friends decrypt it all for me, but there were nearly 1,000 encrypted files in total. Why there were so many, I don't know. And if anything, I wasn't in the mood to sit there and bother them any more than I already had. Just as I was about to leave the folder and take the drive out, I noticed that I decided ultimately to scroll down again to see if I had missed anything, and to my surprise, I actually found a few non-encrypted files at the very bottom of the drive. There were about 3 separate files in total, a video file containing one .mp4 file, a txt file entitled Animation Project Number 12, and the last one being a report of some sort for an animation class. Of course, this piqued my curiosity in a lot of levels. Now, normally I wouldn't really snoop around in other people's stuff, but of course I decided to let it slide for this experience. Why, I don't know. The first file I decided to check out was the txt file, sandwiched in between the .mp4 and the report file. This was pretty much a direct copy and paste of what was written on it. Animation project number 15. Date, December 2nd, 2012. Time, 12:13 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Subject, animation/editing. Summary: Project 15 requires that a skill set of animation and editing on Adobe Premiere and Sony Vegas Pro be used to create something new and original. This exam is due within less than 3 months. Cannot be uploaded online or used for monetary gain or used to promote any rumor or hoax. Any student doing this will automatically be given an F on their project and will fail the class. This project is due before the start of the Christmas/winter break and the end of December. Rules: no explicit content or sexual or graphic material of any kind is allowed, no theft of artwork, and no plagiarism. Well, that was certainly interesting in one way or another, although I did wind up finding a bit of a contradictory statement in it, saying that apparently they had 3 months to get it done, but at the same time had until Christmas to get it finished. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense, but then again, though, it might have been an error on the person's part when he was creating the document. And if anything, I can certainly say, though, looking at that, it just made me even more intrigued about what this project was all about. Not only that, but what had also been created on that video file as well. And if anything, maybe it might have actually it would probably help me out with the project I was doing. Who knew? Closing the TXT file on my laptop, I immediately guided my cruiser over towards the MP4 file on the drive and clicked twice. It took a little bit for the file to load up due to my crappy laptop that I had at the time, but soon enough the file brought up Windows Media Player and began the video. To my complete and utter surprise, the intro for Max and Ruby played in the background. The volume of my laughter was honestly loud enough to be heard by most of the students and staff in my dorm hallway. A few of them even knocked on my door asking if I was okay. Of course, I told them that I was fine, and they let me be. After finally gaining my composure, I sat back down in the chair that I had previously fallen out of from pure laughter, and began watching the animation again. The rest of the Max and Ruby intro played on, and then ended with the scene cutting to black, before finally going and showing the title of the episode itself, which was nothing as there was no specific title of the episode itself to be shown. I honestly had to admit, the animation project was certainly something. I mean, not only did the animation from the start look absolutely fluid and quite similar to the actual show itself, but it was actually rather impressive that somebody managed to make this over the course of less than a month and make it so very well. Despite the overall praise I gave this animation, the rest of the film itself really started to grow, well, how do I put this? Dark. I mean, at least later on in the film, and you'll see why in a little bit. The episode, if you really even want to call it that, started up with a shot of Max and Ruby's backyard. Ruby is sitting down with her various dolls, all having a tea party. Max, on the other hand, was absent from the yard itself. The camera angle then panned over towards Ruby to get a better shot, and a voice alike of Ruby began to speak as she poured her tea. "Why yes, Curly Shirley, I'd be happy to pour you another cup of tea," Ruby said as she poured the tea out into the pot and onto a cup on the creepy-looking doll. Not really sure who exactly voiced Ruby in this animation project, but holy hell was it good. Ruby then proceeded to top off the rest of her doll's teacups in the same manner. The little tea party continued on to go on for a bit, before the scene panned over towards the back door of the backyard, where we see Max walking out of it, his first appearance in the film itself. He's carrying his red elephant in his arms, and he begins to play with said toy, before a grumbling sound comes from his stomach, signaling that he was hungry. Max then placed one of his hands, or paws if you want to be more specific, on his stomach, and then proceeded to walk over towards Ruby, who was now passing out cookies to the dolls. She then stopped and then turned around. The scene then showed Max with a frown on his face. "Yes, Max, is there something that you need?" Ruby asked with her usual smile on her face. Max pointed to his stomach, and the grumbling sound from earlier returned, but this time a little bit louder than before. "Hungry!" Max exclaims. "Okay, Max, just let me finish my tea party and I'll make you lunch afterwards," Ruby responded as she turned back towards Max and back to her table and dolls. Max's ears drooped a bit. "Hungry!" Max exclaimed once again. Ruby turned around and then says in the same calm tone, "I'll make you lunch soon, Max. Just go play with your toys. I won't be long, I promise." Max simply nods, or walking back towards the back door and entering into the house. The scene then fades in for a bit before returning to show Ruby still sitting at her table with the dolls, the sun and of its own self starting to set a little bit. There's no dialogue in the scene, it just shows Ruby handing out some snacks to her dolls. The scene then pans over towards the house and then fades in to show Max in the living room playing with a few of his fire trucks, ambulances, and his red elephant as well. He makes a few vroom vroom sounds for a bit, before lying down on his back while his stomach growls once more. This time, the sound is a lot louder than last, and not to mention longer too. Max's face drops down to a low frown before a look of agitation soon crawls onto his face. He gets up from the spot, and then goes back outside and confronts Ruby once again. Ruby immediately turns around and then responds, "Max, I already told you I'll make you lunch when I'm done with my tea party." "I'm hungry!" Max exclaimed with a hint of agitation at his voice. Ruby immediately recoiled a little bit from that sudden tone of Max's voice, but then immediately begins to softly scold Max. "You do not talk to me like that, mister. I told you, lunch will be made when I am done. Now go back into the house and wait until I'm done, okay?" Max simply frowns, and an angry scowl grows onto his face as he walks back towards the back door, opens it up, and slams it shut. The scene then pans back to Ruby, who now seems a little bit surprised and a bit angry at how Max was acting. Max really needs to learn to be patient. I'll talk with him after I finish up the tea party and make him lunch, Ruby says quietly. The scene then, for the third time, immediately fades out before fading in to show Max in the living room for the second time. He looks absolutely miserable at this point, and judging from the time on the wall clock beside him, it read 4:15 p.m., he seemed to be starving. Max immediately turned his head and peered out the window that led to the backyard. The camera then panned over towards a large mud puddle right next to the tea party set, and then it cut back to Max, who now had his trademark sinister grin on his face. The episode then cut to Ruby, still doing her little tea party as expected. Then, without another word or even a warning for that matter, every single one of Max's toy cars, robots, and other toys and other items immediately began to drive around rather quickly near the mud puddle. Ruby, as you would have expected, jumped a bit from this, but soon was rendered horrified when all the cars and other toys began to splatter the mud all over the tea set, the table, and even the dolls. Ruby's eyes widen with shock as she turns around, only to see her younger brother with a remote control in his hands and his mischievous grin on his face. After a few seconds of mud splattering everywhere, the entire thing stops. The camera then pans back to Ruby, who still has that horrified expression on his face. Max then walks into frame and then says, quite flatly, "Hungry!" for the final time. Ruby slowly turns to Max, and then grabs him by the arm and leads him into the house, where she soon takes him to the living room. She then lets go of Max's arm, and then looks down at her brother with a very, to put it frankly, pissed off expression. "Max, I've told you not once, not twice, but 3 times now that I was going to make you something to eat when I was done with your tea party," Ruby begins, her voice still rather quiet but full of anger. "All you had to do, Max, was be patient, but not only did you interrupt me and ruin my tea party, but you also got mud all over the place. Do you know how long it's going to take for me to get my dolls, my tea set, and everything else cleaned up?" Ruby scolded. Max's expression then changed back to a rather angry one as he immediately screams, "I'm hungry!" But before Max can finish his sentence, Ruby immediately slaps Max across the face. A small cut has been forming on his cheek where Ruby had slapped him. I guess it might have been where her claws might have cut him a bit. A small amount of cartoony blood flows down his face, and his expression is one of shock. "Don't you ever talk to me like that again, Max!" Ruby yells. "You can forget about having dinner tonight if you're going to act like that. Now go upstairs to your room and don't come out for the rest of the night." Max's facial expression then changes to one of depression, where he slowly but surely walks up to the stairs and makes his way towards his room. The scene then transitioned to show Max in his room, crying for a little bit from the yelling that he had received by his older sister. Well, that, and because of the slap and the cut in his face as well. Honestly, it was at that point that I was rather disturbed, but at the same time, I had questioned why this was even considered like a horror story to begin with. If anything, it seemed more like the kind of animated PSA in regard to neglect or something along those lines. Well, needless to say, I found out rather quickly why it was even categorized as such. Max simply sat there on his bed crying after what had happened. That is, however, until his stomach started to growl again. When the growling on his stomach had finally ended, Max immediately hopped off of his bed and made his way out of his room and down towards the kitchen area. Once there, he pulled out a small brown stool and stood atop it, and then pulled open a drawer and rummaged around it for a little bit before pulling out a small steel knife out of it and smiled. I was beginning to become a little bit concerned about what the hell he was doing with that knife. However, my suspicions were immediately quelled when Max walked over towards the pantry and pulled out a jar of peanut butter. However, he's unable to open it up. Then, taking both the knife and the peanut butter, Max walks up towards the hallway and enters Ruby's room. The scene then transitions to shows Ruby sitting in her chair next to her vanity set. She looks rather upset, and most likely regretting the fact that she had yelled at Max, no doubt. Max immediately opens the door without Ruby noticing, and then proceeds to tap Ruby on the shoulder. Ruby turns around, but in the process she immediately slips off her chair and falls on top of Max, as well as the peanut butter and the knife. There's a slight gasp from Ruby before she goes silent. Max gets off of her and looks down at his sister. He also notices that the knife was out of his hand as well. The scene then transitioned over to show the knife stuck in Ruby's throat, with a mild flow of cartoony blood pouring out of her neck. Max looks about as freaked out can honestly be. I mean, not that I could blame him. But then he notices a bit of peanut butter on one of Ruby's fingers, to which he immediately begins to nibble on until the peanut butter is gone, along with a little bit of chewed on off skin and meat. Max immediately licks his lips, and his stomach growls once again. Max said as he rubbed his stomach before the scene faded in. The next scene that came up was something that I was not expecting, nor was I even ready for that matter. The scene cut back to show the kitchen area. However, there were various pots and pans scattered across the stove, and seemed to be full with boiling water as well. On the main counter, there was a couple of raw and bloody chunks, some with a few limbs still attached to them, resting on the counter. The scene then cut to show Max in Ruby's room, using the knife that he had taken earlier from the cabinet, and to cut away at his Ruby, or what was left of her, that is. Using the knife, he carefully hacked away at Ruby's ears, peeling away the flesh and the meat, and even cutting off Ruby's face in the process before putting it on himself like a fucked up Halloween mask. The various sounds of meat tearing and cartoon blood splattering was enough for me to puke a little bit in my mouth. For anybody asking, yes, I am rather squeamish. Hell, I'm honestly not even afraid to admit that I'm a bit of a pussy about this kind of thing as well. I just don't like blood. I don't like blood. I don't like the sound of gore. I don't like the sound of any of that. Which I guess explains why I reacted the way that I did. Max then takes the rest of the meat that he had taken from Ruby's corpse and brought them all down to the kitchen, where he proceeded to put parts of them into the boiling water on the stove carefully. Maxim walks over towards where the camera was at, took the vase that was on his own and folded it into a disgusting looking sandwich thing, and then proceeded to take a big bite out of it. He pretty much ate the rest of the face, and then ate the rest of everything else after it had finished cooking. The final scene before the animation ended was of Max heading off to bed in his pajamas, before finally wrapping himself in the blankets and turning off his lights. The animation project then ended right then and there. My body was still in a state of shock after watching that particular animation, and I won't lie, I can kind of see why something like this most likely hadn't been turned in. I mean, not only did it violate the rules, but it was extremely weird and fucked up, to say the least. Honestly, good thing though this wasn't an actual episode, or else I really would have had a lot of questions to ask. Still though, I had many questions of my own in regard to what the hell was the purpose of this episode? And why was it even made? I mean, I get it. It was supposed to be an animation project, but how in the hell did the pilot of the episode go from being about a tea party to abuse to full-on fucking cannibalism? It just didn't make any remote sense. Then again, this was the creation of the animation students, so maybe it wasn't really meant to make a whole lot of sense. I honestly don't know. Of course, I made sure of it to close out of everything and remove the flash drive out of the computer before I moved on to the final few, and then just moving on with the rest of my day. Thankfully, they were all normal. Well, I mean, at least as normal as encrypted files and other things like that can be for a college student. I tried to get some kind of explanation from my friend, who was the one who had sold me the drives to begin with. The only actual explanation that he would give me was that he had gotten the drive from a friend of his and never really got around to returning it to him, and that was pretty much it. He didn't know anything else about the drive, and he didn't know anything else about the friend that he had gotten it from. If anything, he told me that he felt kind of guilty for keeping it because it really wasn't his. I think he supposedly lost his friendship with that guy because supposedly there was something important on it that he wound up missing. Maybe that was what that animation thing was, perhaps? I tried to get in contact with whoever it was that I could most likely find in regard to this project, but my search only proved to be futile in the end, as the teacher who had assigned the project had left the country for personal reasons. Not to mention that the students themselves were most likely living out their lives with their families as well. So, to be honest, there really wasn't much I could do. Now, it's been a while since I've last seen that episode, and I can certainly say that while this episode was rather unnerving as well as disgusting, it actually did something good for me. That good thing was getting me out of that rut that I had been in before when I saw the animation. In fact, it actually inspired me to really go out and give my 110% with a project I was currently doing. I mean, hell, I even included a few screen caps of the episode itself and included them in the visual part of the project, which the professor absolutely loved. The project itself actually managed to impress my professor so much that not only did she pass me on the spot, she even wrote me a letter of recommendation to the facility that I wanted to work at. If anything, despite this animation being as messed up as it did, it definitely did me one thing. It got me my future career when I got out of college, and it got me an A in my class. If anything, that's a pretty damn sweet deal, if I do say so myself.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to thee, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from a fear-gripping horror-driven nightmarish gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any